the hidden reward of obedience. There is a moment when everything you think you know about love is stripped away, when the very foundation of your faith trembles beneath your feet, and you discover that obedience to the Almighty demands more than you ever imagined possible. This is the story of such a momentous story that begins not with triumph, but with the most impossible command ever whispered into a father's heart. Picture the weathered hands of an old man, fingers that have known the roughness of shepherd's tools and the tenderness of a father's touch. These are the hands of Abraham, the friend of God, the father of nations yet to come. But on this day, as dawn breaks over the hills of Moriah, these hands are trembling. For yesterday, the voice that called him from Ur, the voice that promised him descendants as numerous as the stars, that same beloved voice spoke words that shattered his world. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. Can you fathom the weight of such words? This was not merely a test of faith. This was the apparent destruction of everything God had promised. Isaac was not just Abraham's son. He was the miracle child, born when Sarah's womb had long been closed, born when Abraham himself was 100 years old. Isaac was the laughter in their tent, the fulfillment of decades of waiting, the living proof that God keeps his promises. And now God was asking for him back. The Hebrew text reveals layers of anguish in God's command. Your son, not just any child, but the one born of your flesh. Your only son, not just your son, but the irreplaceable one. Whom you love, not just your only son, but the one who has captured your heart completely. Each phrase was another weight added to an already crushing burden, each word designed to emphasize the magnitude of what was being asked. But here lies the mystery we must understand. Obedience to God is never what it appears to be on the surface. It is never merely about the action demanded. It is about the heart's willingness to trust when trust defies all reason, to hope when hope seems lost, to believe that the God who gives life can be trusted even when he appears to be asking for death itself. The night that followed God's command must have been the longest of Abraham's life. Can you picture him lying beside Sarah, listening to her peaceful breathing, knowing that tomorrow he would begin a journey that might shatter her heart forever? The weight of secrets, the burden of commands that cannot be shared, the terrible loneliness of obedience that must be walked alone, all of this pressed down upon the patriarch's shoulders. As Abraham rose before dawn on that fateful morning, his heart must have been a battleground of emotions. Love for his son warred with love for his God. The promise of blessing wrestled with the command to sacrifice. Human logic screamed against divine instruction. Yet something deeper moved within him, a conviction born from a lifetime of following the Almighty's voice. A certainty that the God who had never failed him would not fail him now, even if he could not see how. Watch as he quietly gathers the wood for the offering, each piece selected with the care of a man who knows its terrible purpose. See how he splits the logs with hands that remember holding his infant son, hands that have blessed Isaac's head in prayer. Every stroke of the axe must have felt like a blow to his own heart. Notice how he wakes his servants with careful restraint, his voice steady, though his heart is breaking. Observe how he saddles his donkey with methodical precision, as if routine could somehow make the impossible bearable. But this was not just another journey. This was the day when obedience would demand everything Abraham held dear, when faith would be stretched to its absolute breaking point, when the promises of God would seem to crumble beneath the weight of God's own commands. Or so it seemed to every human perspective, every natural understanding. The journey to Moriah stretched for 3 agonizing days. 3 days of walking beside his beloved son, listening to Isaac's voice, watching his animated gestures as he spoke of ordinary things. 3 days of Isaac's innocent questions about their destination, his complete trust in his father's wisdom and God's goodness. 3 days of conversation that must have felt like daggers to Abraham's heart, each word from his son's lips a reminder of what he believed he was about to lose forever. Can you imagine the internal torment? Can you picture the sleepless nights, the moments when Abraham must have looked up at the stars, those same stars that God had used to illustrate his promise of countless descendants, and wondered how the promise could possibly survive the sacrifice of the promised one? 3 days for doubt to whisper its seductive lies. Surely God didn't mean this literally. Surely there's another interpretation. Surely the God of love would never ask for such a thing. But Abraham had learned something about divine love that few comprehend. He had discovered that God's love is not weak sentiment or indulgent affection, but a love so pure, so complete, that it demands nothing less than everything. This is not cruelty. This is the love that knows that holding nothing back from God is the only path to true blessing, true joy, true life. On the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place in the distance. Mount Moriah rose before them like an altar built by God himself, its peak shrouded in the mystery of divine purposes. Here, Abraham made a decision that reveals the extraordinary depth of his faith. He turned to his servants and spoke words that still echo through eternity. "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Did you hear it? We will come back to you, both of them. Abraham spoke not with the voice of a man preparing for tragedy, but with the voice of one who believed in resurrection, who trusted in a God powerful enough to raise the dead. The writer of Hebrews tells us that Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. How had Abraham reached this conclusion? Through the discipline of remembering who God is and what God had already proven about his character. He had learned to anchor his faith not in his circumstances, not in his feelings, but in the unshakable character of the one who had called him. When God's commands seem to contradict God's promises, the contradiction is only apparent, not real. This is the hidden reward of obedience. It opens our eyes to see God's power beyond our present understanding, to witness miracles that would otherwise remain hidden from us. When we obey despite our fears, despite our inability to comprehend God's ways, we position ourselves to become witnesses of his glory in ways that comfortable obedience could never produce. As father and son began their ascent together, Isaac carried the wood for his own sacrifice on his back, a haunting foreshadow of another son who would one day carry his own cross up another hill. The fire and the knife were in Abraham's hands, but between them burned a question that would not remain unspoken. Finally, Isaac gave voice to what must have been troubling his mind. "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" The question pierced Abraham's heart like a sword. Here was his beloved son, trusting completely in his father's wisdom, assuming that of course there would be a lamb. Abraham's answer reveals the very heart of faith. "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." In Hebrew, the phrase carries layers of prophetic meaning. Abraham spoke more truly than he knew, prophesying not only about the immediate situation, but about the ultimate provision God would make for all humanity. He declared that in the moment of greatest need, when all human resources are exhausted, when all hope seems lost, there God appears with his provision. This is the pattern of divine obedience. We step forward in faith, and God steps forward with provision. We cannot see his provision until we have taken our step of obedience. The reward is hidden until the moment of surrender. At the summit of Moriah, Abraham began to build an altar. Stone upon stone, each one a declaration of trust in God's character, despite the impossibility of circumstances. Every stone was a statement. I believe that God is good, even when I cannot understand his ways. I believe that God is faithful, even when his commands seem to contradict his promises. He arranged the wood with careful precision, creating the platform for what he believed would be his greatest sacrifice. But unknown to Abraham, God was preparing to reveal that apparent loss is often hidden gain, that what looks like death is often the doorway to unprecedented life. The moment arrived when Abraham could delay no longer. With hands that surely shook, he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar. Can you imagine the trust required in both father and son? Isaac, strong enough to resist, submitted to his father's hands. Abraham, with every fiber of his being crying out against this act, submitted to his heavenly Father's will. This is the essence of true obedience. Not the absence of struggle, but surrender in the midst of struggle. Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. In that moment, everything hung in the balance. The promises of God, the future of nations, the hope of blessing for all the earth, all of it rested on the edge of that blade. This was the ultimate test of whether Abraham truly believed that God's character could be trusted even when his commands seemed to contradict his promises. The knife was raised. And then, oh, the beauty of divine timing, just as obedience reached its fullest expression, the angel of the Lord called out from heaven, "Abraham! Abraham!" The urgency in the repetition spoke of heaven's eagerness to intervene. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. The knife fell from Abraham's trembling hand. The relief that flooded his system must have been overwhelming. But this was not merely relief. This was revelation. God had been testing not to discover what was in Abraham's heart, but to reveal it to Abraham himself and to all generations who would follow. Now I know that you fear God. The Hebrew word for know speaks of intimate, experiential knowledge. God was saying, now it has been demonstrated beyond all doubt that your reverence for me surpasses even your love for your most precious earthly treasure. This was a diploma of faith earned through the crucible of obedience. But the story doesn't end with relief. The greatest revelation was yet to come. Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. God himself had provided the lamb for the burnt offering, exactly as Abraham had prophesied. The provision had been there all along, waiting for the moment when faith would be proved genuine. This is the hidden reward of obedience. God's provision is always present, but often concealed until we demonstrate our willingness to trust him completely. The ram was not created in that moment. It had been placed there by divine orchestration. Our obedience doesn't create God's provision. It reveals provision that was always there, waiting for eyes of faith to see it. Abraham took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. The sacrifice was still required, but the son was spared. This substitutionary sacrifice points to the great mystery of redemption, that God would one day provide the ultimate lamb, his own son, to be the sacrifice that would spare all of humanity. On this very mountain, centuries later, another father would watch his son carry wood up a hill, but this time there would be no last-minute reprieve. Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide," Jehovah Jireh. And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." This became more than just a memorial. It became a prophetic declaration, a promise to all who would face impossible circumstances. On the mountain of the Lord, in the high places of surrender, in the elevated moments of complete trust, their provision appears. But the hidden reward was not finished revealing itself. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven, bringing a blessing that transformed obedience into inheritance. "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." Do you see the progression? First came the call to obedience. Then came the provision in the moment of need. Finally came the multiplication of blessing beyond what was originally promised. The reward was not just the return of what was surrendered. It was the exponential increase of what was given back. Isaac was not merely restored. Through Isaac, blessings would flow to all nations for all generations. This is perhaps the greatest hidden reward of obedience. It positions us not just to receive God's blessings, but to become channels of blessing to others. When we hold nothing back from God, He holds nothing back from us, and through us, His goodness flows to countless others. Our obedience becomes the foundation upon which God builds His purposes for generations. Abraham had been called the friend of God, but now he earned a new title, the father of faith, not because his faith was perfect, but because his obedience proved his faith genuine. He became the example for all who would struggle with trusting God when trust requires everything, for all who would face commands that seem to contradict promises. The ram caught in the thicket speaks to us still. It reminds us that when God calls us to surrender what we love most, He is not taking away blessing. He is preparing to reveal greater blessing. When He asks us to sacrifice what seems essential to our happiness, He is not diminishing our joy. He is preparing to multiply it beyond imagination. When He commands what appears to lead to loss, He is actually leading us to gain we never could have conceived. This is why obedience to God is never really about giving up. It's about giving in to a love so vast, so wise, so generous that it knows exactly what we need better than we do. It's about trusting that the one who formed us, who knows the number of hairs on our head, who has plans for our welfare and not for calamity, can be trusted with our most precious treasures. The mountain of Moriah stands as an eternal testimony to this truth. Every time we face the call to radical obedience, every time we're asked to trust God with what we cannot bear to lose, we're being called to our own Moriah moment. We're being invited to discover what Abraham discovered, that obedience to God is never a path to poverty, but always a doorway to provision, never a road to loss, but always a journey to abundance beyond our wildest dreams. The hidden reward of obedience is this. It reveals that God's heart toward us is better than we dared to hope, His provision more abundant than we dared to dream, His plans for us more beautiful than we dared to imagine. When we say yes to His commands, even when they terrify us, even when they defy our understanding, even when they cost us everything we think we need, we position ourselves to receive everything we never knew we wanted. Abraham walked down from that mountain a different man than the one who had climbed it. He had ascended as a father willing to sacrifice his son. He descended as a man who had tasted the goodness of God in ways few humans ever experience. He had gone up carrying the weight of an impossible command. He came down carrying the promise of blessing for all nations. Isaac, too, was forever changed. He had experienced the love of a father willing to sacrifice everything in obedience to God. And he had witnessed firsthand the provision of the God who sees all needs and meets them in perfect timing. The son who was almost sacrificed became the inheritor of promises beyond measure. The ram in the thicket became the symbol of divine provision, the reminder that God's resources are always sufficient for whatever He calls us to do. Its sacrifice speaks of provision offered at the perfect moment, of love demonstrated in the most practical way. And so the story of Abraham and Isaac becomes our story. We are all called to our own Mount Moriah moments, those times when obedience requires everything and promises nothing we can see. We are all invited to trust that the God who called Abraham into the darkness of faith is the same God who floods that darkness with the light of His provision. The hidden reward of obedience is not hidden because God wants to keep it from us. It's hidden because we can only discover it by walking the path of surrender. It cannot be grasped by those who demand to see the blessing before they offer the sacrifice. It cannot be possessed by those who require guarantees before they take steps of faith. It can only be revealed to those who, like Abraham, are willing to obey the voice of God even when that voice leads them into the mystery of His perfect will. In the end, the story of Mount Moriah is about the character of the God who orchestrates all things for the good of those who love Him, who weaves even our most difficult moments of obedience into the tapestry of His eternal purposes, and who rewards faith with blessings that surpass our ability to contain or comprehend. This is the God who calls us still, who invites us to our own journeys of radical trust, and who waits to reveal to us the hidden rewards that can only be discovered by those who dare to say yes to His voice, regardless of what that yes might cost. The mountain of the Lord still stands, and on that mountain it will still be provided. The question that remains is simply this: will we climb?